My name is Emily. And this is not a story about loss, it is a story about being erased while still breathing. People think revenge begins with anger, with screaming, with destruction. The revenge begins quietly when the people who betrayed you are calm, organized, already moving on. And you are the only one still trying to understand how your entire life disappeared without permission. I was 34 years old when I stopped existing. In a glass conference room there were no raised voices. No accusation, just three men sitting across from me, hands folded, faces composite. One was my husband, one was my business partner, and one was the lawyer who had looked me in the eyes for years and told me everything was under control. None of them looked uncomfortable. That was the first warning sign. Criswell Systems was my companion, at least that is what I believed. For 12 years he built it from nothing, from sleepless nights and code written on borrowed machines, from investor meetings, where men smiled politely and asked when the real founder would arrive. There was no real founder. There was only Mebut. Being a woman in technology means proving yourself twice. Once with results, once with silencio. I did both. Company grew. Clients trusted us. The name Croswell meant reliability, and while I was building something tangible, the people closest to me were quietly dismantling my ownership of it. Mark Sullivan had been my partner from the beginning, charismatic, well-spoken, the kind of man investors leaned toward when he Talketti handled the systems, the architecture, the things no one else understood. Mark handled perception and my husband Andrew handled what he called the administrative weight: legal filings, financial structures, signature SU. Do not need to worry about this, he always said. I will take care of it for us. So I let him. That was my mistake. The lawyer cleared his throat teamly. He said softly, as of 3 weeks ago, you no longer retain controlling interest in Croswell Systems. For a moment I thought I misheard him. Then I hadn't it because it was funny, but because disbelief has its own sound. That is impossible, I said. I founded the company I own. Mark slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents I recognized, immediately appearing. Agreements, equity restructures, amended ownership clause, and my signature or something identical to it. I turned to Andrew. He did not look at minute. On say new? I asked. He nodded. They were going to remove you eventually, he said. I just made sure we did not lose everything. With that word hollowed me out. They explained everything calmly, how my shares had been diluted, how decisions were made while I was focused on development, how I would receive a severance package in recognition of my contributions. Skoden store and bonds. Ownership, not authority, not identity. Be the end of the meeting. I was no longer CB. The end of the night. I was no longer a whiff. Andrew moved out. That evening, Mark stopped responding, and the company I built from nothing sent me a termination email, signed by the man who never wrote a single line of code. I did not cry. Shock is quiet. He packed a bag. I drove until the city disappeared. I slept in my car for 3 nights, parked where no one knew my name, and not because I had nowhere to go, but because accepting reality felt heavier than exhaustion. On the 4th night, I parked across from the office. Lights were still on me old office window glowed. Someone else sat at my desk. That was when I understood they had not just taken my companion, they had erased me from the story. Most people would have exploded, filed lawsuits, screamed online, begged to be heard. He did not. He went silent. Silence is dangerous when it becomes deliberate. Sold what little remained under my name. I closed accounts. I erased my digital footprint. Oh, the world. Emily vanished. No public breakdown, no explanation, just absence. Seen absence can be a weapon because revenge is not noise. Revenge is preparation. Revenge is patience. They thought I was finished. They were wrong. People think disappearing means running away. It does not. Running away is loud. It leaves tracks. It wants to be chased. What I did was different. Withdrew. First thing I learned after losing everything was this: when people destroy you legally, they expect you to respond. Emotionality. Expect tears, public outrage, desperation. They do not expect silence. Scene. They never expect patience. For months I lived without identity, no home, no title, no version of myself that mattered anymore. Motels near highways, short-term rentals, paid in Kashevary. Morning. I woke up without knowing who I was supposed to be, and slowly that became freedom. Friends reached out. A Cordla former colleagues sent messages filled with pity. Ignored them all, not because they were cruel, but because they were watching. And I needed to disappear before I could become Dan Jerusi. Spent my days reading contracts, case law, corporate fraud fillings. He studied the language they used to erase me because betrayal leaves fingerprints. Once at night, I replayed every moment I trusted Andrew every time he told me to rest. Every time he said my focus was better spent building, not reading, was not lying, he was redirecting. That distinction mattered. 3 months later, I sold my wedding ringlet for money for finality watching. It disappeared across the counter. Felt like shedding skin, painful. Necessary. Changed my name. Social, new email, new phone, new address. He became unremarkable. It was the point. People think revenge requires power. It does not. It requires access, and access begins with list. And NG took work no one would ever associate with Mequiat Consulting. Temporary contracts, fixing systems. No one wanted their name attached. Toy did not chase prestige, chase pattern. Show companies really fail. How executives hide mistakes. How greed always outruns caution. 6 months after I vanished, I saw Mark again in a screen, confident, relaxed, talking about innovation. He listened carefully, was repeating ideas that were not his. That was when I understood Mark was not a creator, he was a collector, and collectors always overreach. Andrew stayed quiet. That worried me. More men like him do not need attention, they need control, and control always leaves cracks. He tracked Crosswell systems, public filings, hiring patterns, settlements buried under silence. They were expanding too fast, growing the way companies grow when no one understands the foundation. Anima Ray made a listnet of revenge of leverage, what they needed, what they ignored, what they assumed no one would notice. He noticed everything. Year passed to the world. Emily was finished. She'd a footnote. That was exactly where I wanted to be, because the most dangerous woman in the room is the one everyone stopped watching. Gand when they finally realized I still existed. He would not be asking for anything back. He was not rebuilding my old life. He was designing a new one that did not require trust, one that did not need permission, and that would place me close enough to them that when the time came, they would not even see me coming. There is a moment in every revenge story that people never talk about. Booth moment when you stop watching from the outside and step close enough to be hurt. Agant that moment terrified me, and I did it anyway. For almost a year, I stayed invisibly, learned. I listened. I collected, but invisibility has limits. You cannot change a system without touching it, and touching it means risky. Did not return as missile. Family was dead to them, so I created someone else, and not a dramatic identity, not a powerful one, just a useful one. I positioned myself where desperate companies look for help, not at the top, not in the spotlight, but in the places executives never bother to look. Temporary consulting, risk assessments, quiet technical audits, kind of work no one remembers your name for. It worked faster than I expected, because companies like Crosswell bleed quietly, do not collapse overnight. They leak small problems, ignored warnings, deferred responsibility, and I knew exactly where those leaks would appear first. Contact was indirect: a subcontractor, a compliance review, a third party vendor. My name did not appear anywhere near the Korean. That was intentional. First time I saw their internal systems again, my hands shook, not from fear, from recognition. Architecture was still mine, but it had been stretched, modified, layered with shortcuts. They were building on a foundation they did not fully understand, and foundations remember who poured them. He did not sabotage anything, yet he fixed small problems, made myself valuably rehabilitating. Never knew my name, but his decisions brushed against my work. He saw his impatience, his appetite for speed, his refusal to hear no. He wanted growth, visibility, applause, and he was willing to trade stability for it. Andrew was harder to read. He moved through paperwork like a shadow operating, redirecting. Signing men like him do not make noise, they erase evidence. He watched them botnet with hatred, with clarity. Hated clouds judgment, clarity sharpens. At first opportunity came quickly, a rushed expansion, a regulatory shortcut, a timeline that did not allow proper review. They needed someone to sign off, Somion competent, someone discreet, Samian forgettable. That someone was my flagged risks, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to document them, just enough to create a recordnet to stop the decisionto market. People misunderstand revenge. They think it is about striking, it is noted as about positioning, making sure that when people fall, they fall because of their own weight. Weeks passed, then months. Moved closer. On contract, one approval, one quiet conversation at a team I never leading, never falsified. Simply let them choose, and they chose exactly what I expected. The first internal warning was ignored, then the second, then the third, each one buried under urgency and optimism, and every buried warning became leveragey. At night, I documented everything. Gmails, approvals, signature respiratory were consistent, which meant predictable. First crack appeared in a place no one expected, not financial, not legal reputational small partner, a minor delay, an explanation that did not fully align nothing serious yet Mark dismissed it public liandry neutralized it Pravadalithi had done this before they believed they could do it. Again that was when I knew they had not changed they had only grown bolder and bold. People make clean Mystikisi was no longer preparinji was inside close enough to hear the stress in their voices, close enough to feel the system tightening thee still. Did not know I existed in that was the most dangerous part because the moment you underestimate the woman you are ascetis the moment she becomes unavoidable there is a point where revenge stops feeling active you are no longer pushing, no longer steering you. Are simply watching people accelerate toward choices they cannot undo that is where greed takes over did nothing dramatino confrontation, no exposure stayed useful, quiet, agreeably that made them reckless people as some powerful men are kashustathy. Are not they are addicted to momentum's success convinces them they are untouchable, they begin to treat risk as an inconvenience. A warning Criswell was expanding faster than its structure allowed new contracts, new regions, new promises, layered on unstable systems he watched approvals stack on top of each other each one justified by urgency, each one defended by confidence Mark pushed growth always. Growth wanted headlines, panels, visibility speed, mattered more than integrity and speed, always. Demands shortcuts and Drew supported it quietly, legally, careful did not question ambition insulated it every risk softened with language, every liability wrapped in protection men like him do not stop disasters the prepare excuse stopped flagging. Risks not because they disappear but because they had already been documented enough on. I listened to frustration, to impatience, to the subtle shift in tone when pressure replaced certainty first internal meeting I attended under my new identity. Felt ordinarino one noticed. Mano one needed Toddy talked over data, over warnings, over nuancethi talked in projections prosent always sound clean Simeon mentioned capacity limits Mark waved it away and Drew reframed its decision. Moved forward just like thought he felt nothing no satisfaction. No fear just confirmation next step required nothing. From method was the most dangerous part partners began asking questions manor one's delivery timelines, support guarantees, compliance language questions. Are harmless until they accumulate Mark answered confidently Andrew reassured. Professionally they had done this many times before they believed repetition was mastery internally stress in crescentiums, stretched processes, bypassed responsibilities blurred every own. Assumed someone else was watching the foundation one Wasi kept records quietly. Consistently never highlighted them never emphasized paternity let them remain invisibly just like I once had. Beanthan came the first real delanate catastrophe simabras. Partner escalated. Mark dismissed it. Andrew mitigated publicly. Nothing happened drivetly. Tension apparad that tension was my signal greed hates interruption ons interrupted. It demands compensation more speed, more pressure, more risk Mark pushed harder and Drew. Authorized more aggressive live machine accelerated I stopped dingy stopped adjusting became an observer even at this stage is not action it is restraint knowing when to stop intervening knowing when silence causes more damage than truthy remembered. The conference room, the calm faces, the way my life had been removed without noisy and I understood Soma think this was never about Andrew it was about symmetry they erased me quiet Lizo I let them erase themselves. The same wave system began, tightenings more. Failures multiplied, communications lagged, explanations became longer long explanations are the first sign of collapse stayed invisible still useful, still forgettable still. Insidithi were running out of margin they just did not know it yet there. Is always a moment when silence stops protecting people when the weight becomes too heavy, when denial becomes louder than truth that moment does not arrive with drama, arrives with panic the failure did not come from the core system that would have been too obvious it came from an edge, a secondary partner, a dependency no one considered important enough to monitor those. Are always the most dangerous a scheduled rollout stalled not completely, just enough for questions, enough for escalation it. First, they treated it as a delay a misunderstanding, a communication issue its words are comfort, languagethy by. Time Mark reassured everyone, public like confident interviews, carefully framed. Optimism Drew worked behind the scenes emails, calls, legal. Buffer she was very good at that but something was different. This time the explanation did not hold partners compared notes. Timelines conflicted. Documentation failed to align small inconsistencies surfaced inconsistentist invite scrutiny internal meetings. Multiplied urgent. Closed door unscheduled the tone change people spoke faster. Listened lustrous makes honesty inconveniente stayed quite still helpful. Still percent still invisible thin the second failure happened closer to the cornot catastrophisabita. Impossible to dismiss a partner froze expansion not publicly. Internal that distinction Mitter Dandrew reacted first the always died attempted to contain it legal language. Temporary clauses. Private assurance but containment requires trust and trust. Was already eroding Mark pushed back hated hesitation looked like weakness and weakness threatened perception the disagreed not loudly but enough enough for tension to surface enough for cracks to Houdini documented everything tone shifts. Approval chains. Timing gaps patterns tightened Simone asked for a full internal review and Drew delayed it Mark dismissed it delay and dismissal are confessions pressure klimbed executives demanded certainty. Teams demanded direction no one had answersomely. Momentum that was when panic replaced confidence you can hear panis it hides behind speed Mark began overpromising Dindwar began overprotecting both reactions accelerated the same outcome story they told externally remained clen inside. It was unrevealing. Felt nothinho triumph just inevitability is never loud. At this stage it is quiet. Administrative record dead the first formal complaint Vedsmal. Technical specificit could not be brushed Asadine Drew read it to say no because he asked for clarification never asked questions unless he was uncertain Mark wanted it Barry Dandrew wanted it soft tenother option worked that complaint triggered a requirement disclose review. Verification sism hate verification when they are built. On short cuss the process began slowly reluctantly and once it starts it does not stopy did not intervene I did not day waited because at this stage all I had to do is let them speak they had erased me quietly no they were explaining themselves vessedly. Andrew did not panic the way Mark died never had Mark reacted to fear by moving faster. Andrew reacted to fear by tightening control was his instinct, his comfort, his illusion when the review process began. Andrew stepped forward not publicly. Not visibly but internally he positioned himself as the filter, the interpreter, the shield every question passed through him, every document rerouted, every explanation softened he did not. Letha is important 3 from media framing is more dangerous than lying because it feels responsible, reasonable, protective he began consolidating communication own channel, one voice, one narrative that was the first mistake in Tritralizate and leaves fingerprints especially when pressure in Crescendra asked for summaries. Instead of raw data he asked for interpretations. Instead of log she trusted conclusions more than evidence men like him believe structure creates safety it does note it creates traceability I watched him work methodical, careful, certain believed he was preventing Chashi was creating a map the requests became more specific versions, timelines, approval she needed to know who had seen what and when had urgency exposed him Somion questioned a revision Andrew explained it Samin questioned the explanation Drew. Clarification multiplies exposure began issuing guidance Senate directive sugadent kind that sounds optional but carries expectation that guidance contradicted earlier records net overvly subleonogy noted the discrepancies net emotional appreciationessly. Began scheduling private calls off calendar unrecorded believed privacy meant safety privacy creates gaps and gaps demand explanation review team requested original documentation edit unfiltered Drew hesitata thought hesitation lasted seconds. Mature he complete but compliance under pressure is never cleansed documents did not match not perfectly dates drifted, language shifted. Responsibility blurred nothing criminal nothing obvious just inconsistent consististis invites questions Sandry started. Protecting individuals rising blame, repositioning accountability implies vulnerabilities and asked why certain approvals bypass standard review and Drew answered to quickly that answer did not align with Pulici felt something. Then it. Satisfaction Escient was the man who told me everything was handled this was how he handled things she was not malicious she was convinced said convinced. He was the adult in the room. Convinced control equaled care the review expand a scope widened not. Because of a single issue but because of patterns cannot be explained away and Drew requested timey extensions. Delays time is a currency when you ask for it, you reveal. Shortage Mark grew impatient the hated scrutiny hated slow process their alliance. Strained Andrew stopped shielding Mark, not intentionally but by necessity, focused inward in structure. On documentation on survival that shift exposed Mark further, and Andrew did not notice the system tighten ed requests increased. Tolerance decreased. Andrew made one final mistake. He attempted to preempt a conclusion, not with deception, with confidence. Sacrifice without certainty is a signal. That signal was noted. Logodrefent review was no longer procedural, it was investigative, and felt it. Feeney saw it in the way his messages changed, shorter, careful, guarded. He was no longer controlling damage, he was responding to it. I stayed silent, still helpful, still inside, because at this stage every word they chose was becoming evidence Mark had never understood. Silencio him. Silence meant weakness, absence, failure. He believed visibility was power, and when pressure arrived, he reached for the only thing he trusted. Attention. Review tightened. Questions multiplied. Processes slowed. Everything Mark Hatid began doing interviews again, it because anyone is scared, because he needed to reclaim the narrative. He spoke about innovation, about resilience, about leadership. Under pressure he smiled. Smiles are shields. When confidence begins to crack, Andrew warned him not directly, carefully. Legally Mark did not listen. Mark believed problems existed only if they were acknowledged, so he talked. Had the first contradiction appeared quickly. A timeline mentioned publicly that did not match internal documentation. On dramaticist enough, Simone noticed, said the always. Though Mark corrected himself casually. Public like correction creates a trail. He spoke again, this time more forceful. Celerity as performance necessity without alignment is exposure. Partners begin forwarding clips. Internalisquent follow-ups if onespolitedly attempted to intervene at a ladiance. Words leave the mouth, they cannot be contained. Mark began referencing decisions he was not fully informed about. Hat was always his weakness. Collected ideas, not details. Our unforgiving review team requested clarification specific about statements made public. That shift mattered. Public language now required internal defense. Mark could not defend what he did not understand. He deferred to Andrew. Reframed. Reframing did not match. He watched the tension stretch, not between departments but when Aegis Mark felt cornered. People perform. He called an all-hands meeting. Gunshadoled. Unnecessary. Rindros spoke about unity, about confidence, about ignoring. Noise is what people call truth when it threatens. Theme employs list and quitlent does not mean agreement. So mean asked a question simple. Technical. Mark answered confidently. Froze. Saw it a pause too long. A glance away. That moment. Travel at the recording. Circulate internally, then external, and it leaks. Haired. Mark tried to clarify. Clarification multiplies damage. He contradicted earlier statements, not malicious. Lion aggregation is fatal when you lead systems you did not build. The review team escalated. Scope expanded again, including communication. Spibic internal record. Dead. Mark blamed advisor Sandru. Consultants timing blame. Isolates. Andrew stopped protecting him, not deliberate libet. Instinctively self-preservation is faster then loyalty. Mark noticed. Said Tulate. Spoke again. Defensive. Listened as if reveals fear. Partners paused. Contracts. Media shifted. Tone not hostile. Execution is louder than criticism. Mark tried one last movie. A bold announcement. A distraction. Boldness without foundation collapses. The announcement triggered verification. Verification triggered exposure. Through change. People stopped nodding. They started documenting. Mark was still talking but no one was listening. That is how power leaves, not with force, with indifference. I felt nothing. No satisfaction, just completion. Mark had done exactly what I needed with it. Ever knowing my name, I stayed invisible and sedestal. Quiet. Beckus the louder. Mark Beckameth clearer. The record grew, and once the record exists, revenge no longer requires intention, it requires patience. There is a moment when denial collapses, not loudly, not dramatically, but inward, when people realize the problem is not outside the room, it is already inside. Review stopped asking general questions, it started asking name estimations approvals. Origin specificity is a sign. Alandra sensed it first. The always died. Begin reading messages twice, then three. Time short. Replies delayed. Response control was slipping. Simone requested historical context, not policy, not process. She storeth a word changed the temperature. He wanted to know why certain systems were designed the way they were. We dependencies existed. Why shortcuts had been possibly foundations behaved the way they did under stress. Andrew search for documentation. Organ documentation. Earliest versions. That is when my absence became visible, cause my name appeared everywhere in it, prominently, not proudly but structure limed in comments, architectural notes, legacy decisions. Fingerprints of someone who built not manage Edindru noticed the paterni no because he stopped requesting Samarish asked for raw Phyllis original commits. Initial approvals mark dismissed etat first the said my name on casualius if testing whether it still carried weight. It did Somion asked where I was. Now no one answered that silence was different. It was not strategist. It was uncertain. Andri tried to contextualize use distance time. Relevancy said the system had evolved systems. Remember. Their creators even when people try to forget review team asked a question Andrew could not redirect. We was the original architect Ramava Dremoval implies intention. Andri hesitated not long but enough Mark Lafed to loudless dismissally. Is a shield that fails under scrutiny. Requested my departure document severance transfer agreements. Exit rationalith room tightened. Those documents existed but they did not. A language conflicted. Timing overlapped. Authority blurred said Simone. Notice the signature remedy or something identical that triggered verification. Verishin triggered memory. Andrew stopped speaking. Mark filled the space. Talked about moving forward, about growth, about letting go of the past. The past does not let go. Somion asked a simple question. We did Emily disappear? No one answered. That was the moment, not when my name appeared but when they realized that he had not chosen to leave. A had been removed. Andrew felt I could tell his messages changed. Toneless certainty, more caution. Mark felt it differently as Threath tried to reframe the story too. Late stories collapse when facts aligned. The review team requested a formal interview with me. Andrew stared at the request longer than necessary. Knew Thini had not vanished. Hetty had repositioned. Mark asked where I was. Andrew did not answer. The search quietly professional networks, industry contacts, consultants and novelist of Ishavish has weight when people start looking for youth. Request came again, more direct, more official. Andrew asked a question he had not asked in years. Where are you? Read it was say did not respond because revenge at this stage is not about reappearing. It is about letting people understand they have been speaking in your house without knowing you were listening. The finally understood Emily was not go Nemely was everywhere. Collapse does not arrive like an explosion. It arrives like gravity, unavoidable, unforgiving. Against my name entered the process. Everything accelerated not because I spoke but because systems began answering questions. Honslife review expanded agon external. Now independent, unnegotiable patterns stopped asking for reassurance that they asked for protection. That shift ended everything. Ginger tried to manage expectations but expectation management requires authority and his authority was dissolving. Mark stopped speaking public line at strategic. Lafayette finally found him internal access tightened. Permissions revoked. Roles reassigned, decision rights suspended. Spenson feels temporary until it is not. People who once rushed approvals now ask for confirmation. White tone changed. Became formal meetings. Recorded language measured language means liability. Andrew attempted one final consolidation. A narrative, a sequence, an explanation could not align it. Many versions exist. History resisted simplification. The external reviewers requested direct interviews, not summaries, not representatives. Evidence delayed. Andrew complied. That difference mattered. Andrew answered careful. I always had but careful answers create follow-up questions. Mark answered emotionally. Emotion contradicts documentation. Gap widened. Partners froze funding not permanently. Condestination freezes kill momentum. Staff notice admiral shifted. People protect themselves before they protect company's resignation. Follow eat one us. The most dangerous kind knowledge left the building and knowledge does not. Reader. Nandrew stopped trying to control the narrative. He focused on limiting exposure. Imitation implies damage. Mark demanded loyalty. Loyalty evaporates under investigation. They stopped speaking to each other. That was the final break. With it coordination, without trust, without silence. Everything surpassed the original removal, the signature discrepancies, the rushed expansions, the buried warnings. The alignadalent is collapse. Legal counsel changed then changed agon that never signals confidence. The board intervened. Event removes agent. Cyan Drew was cited not accused but excluded. Mark was suspended. Temporary is language people use when permanence is obviously watched from incidental, invisiblestal. Quiety felt nothing triumph. No relief, just closure. Revenge is often described as victoria. Is noted is completion. They had taken everything from Menno. Nothing belonged to them. Company did not fail. Overnight it stalled. Staling is worse. Reputation froze. Opportunity evaporated. Trust dissolved. They were no longer powerful. They were explainably. It was the end not of the story but of their control over it. When everything ended, nothing resether was no return. No apology that mattered. No lesson delivered. Cleanly systems moved on. People rebranded. Stories shifted. That is how institutions survive. I did not step forward it because I was afraid, because I no longer needed to be seen. The investigation closed, findings documented, responsibilities redistributed, language softened. That softness was not mercy, it was practicality. Mark disappeared from relevance and not dramatical liquid which suited him and Drew resurfaced. Elsewhere's Mueller role, narrower scope, control. Reduced to routine, was not mentioned ednit officially, but absence after presence changes. Roomsy left when the process finished. Headnet ceremonially in a normal day with a normal message. No one stopped. May no one needed to outside the building. Nothing. Waited. No justice, no reward. Just spacey took work that required precision, not loyalty. Chose environments that respected silence. Ceiling did not arrive as relief, it arrived as clarity. Did not forgive. A forgiveness requires a request known. Cam I did not carry. Hatred hated. Requires proximity, had distance. What I carried was understanding that systems do not betray people. People use systems to do it. Quietly learned that revenge does not need anger, it needs accuracy. Hat they lost was not power, it was certainty. What I gained was not revenge, it was authorship. Stopped explaining myself, stopped proving timelines, stopped clarifying intentions. Me name no longer needed context. The story ends. Hairnet because everything is resolved, but because nothing controls me. Animorsum. Endings are loud, this one was precise.